Hey everyone, I really think you're going to enjoy this episode with Michael Fox. I think this is an episode that I'm super proud to start this journey with Venture Tank. Michael is a brilliant individual. He covered different themes specifically on raising money and the flavors of money. I mean, when you go and raise money, depending on whether you're getting it from friends or family, venture, institutional, you're going to have to speak to them in a different language. Funny enough, we talk about language, we talk about culture. He's here in Bali right now, and there is a unique opportunity, not just arbitrage, but a unique opportunity for being able to innovate and to be able to bring a product or a service on the institutional level, whether it is a conglomerate of a company that wants to come and establish a product here in the region. But most importantly, I think what he covered was Bali being a fertile ground for testing. They're agnostic, meaning, great relations with surrounding countries. We covered so many different themes, specifically around critical thinking and how to actually create value for the world. I think it's something that you will enjoy, and I hope you do enjoy it and you leave a subscribe and a like on this video. And I can't wait for you guys to see this episode. We're going to dive right in, enjoy it, drop comments, and let me know what part of the world you're in and what you're up to today. Thank you all for paying attention and tuning in to Venture Tank, and we'll see you in the episode with Michael Fox. Hey everyone, welcome to Venture Tank, a show where we speak to some of the best minds in business and finance. Today I'm with Michael Fox. He is a corporate whisperer, a venture mentor, all around great guy. So Michael, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Excited to speak to you about a lot of different things today. And first I want to set the context. We're going to be laughing a lot, having a lot of fun. That is the kind of person that I've gotten to know over the last couple of weeks. And so, just wanted to first set the stage for Bali, which is where we're seated right now, Lighthouse Studios. The Buddha's here. We're all enjoying ourselves here in Bali. But the thing is, why are you here? That's the kind of the question I want to start with.
Well, let me help you here, give you a little pedigree and context first. So I went to MIT and I've started a number of startups. I've worked in corporate. I was one of the primaries that launched the VIO for Sony and then realigned Mitsubishi's business unit. So I have a number of corporate experience. I've done the startup route and helped accelerate and validate a number of initiatives. I've also been worked on the institutional side. So I've worked as an EIR for a $5 billion fund. I've helped establish what started as one fund that turned into 3 funds. But I consider myself more of an entrepreneur. I've also been an MIT venture mentor for 15 years. And I became a thought leader in corporate venture, which is a different flavor of money. And I've even been an adjunct professor for 4 years for an MBA program teaching final thesis in San Francisco focused on design thinking. So I'm just fundamentally a problem solver. Now, to answer your question, I spent 25 years in Silicon Valley and decided that some of the real innovation and real markets are actually not in the US. And if you were to put a pin in Hong Kong, for example, and draw a 5-hour flight radius, that's half the planet. And most people don't realize that. In Asia, they understand it, but in the rest of the world, that's not common knowledge. And if you don't understand the cultural nuances, and if you don't have boots on the ground and have accrued relationship equity, it's a recipe for failure in order to be relevant with those cultures. So a year and a half ago, I moved from the Silicon Valley to Australia to vet a particular initiative and was offered a distinguished talent visa. And some of the people that stepped up to speak for my value were the CTO of British Telecom, TI, the father of corporate venture of IBM. The list is quite long, but understanding Australia is a very relevant component to this, but it became increasingly apparent to me that one has to start looking at some of the the cultural biases that the lay of the land, and I felt that Bali was much more like Switzerland in order to be able to allows me the opportunity to work with India or Singapore or Thailand, as well as Australia and the U.S., Europe and EU, and so on, and many of the different countries. And I thought that what's happening in Bali, I started looking at current events with Indonesia. Having had some experience here in Bali, it's not just a vacation spot. It's right in the middle of everything. And given some of the current events of what's going on with Indonesia, if you look at the waves on the water, they're positioning themselves to be the Germany of the Southern Hemisphere for energy. And the decisions that are being made are not shoot from the hip. They were made 6, 8, 10, 12, 15 years ago in order to unlock some of the value that we see now. And I share some of the values, the decision making that's being made. The actions echo a desire to be more relevant in the not just the supply chain but the value chain. So they're shifting who they sell their coal and nickel deposits, and starting to make batteries, and they want to be more relevant. They're post G20. They're now shifting, trying to wean themselves off of coal dependency. And these are things that are very relevant to me because I'm a very climate tech sensitive guy. So that's why I'm here.
Amazing, Michael. So sounds like you're talking about culture here. And so not just obviously Balinese culture, which is amazing, right? We've gotten to experience that. I see your batik shirt, looks really cool. But let's talk about
Bali
culture.
pride.
Bali pride, baby. Let's talk about culture in terms of on the business aspect and how important it is, because I think it's really something people don't pay as much attention to, and how important, seeing how important it is.
Sure. You can't really look at culture without looking at localization. And I'm a student of history, or I try to be. The global village made a race to globalization with breakneck speed, and in my mind, it was irresponsible. Thinking that things like just-in-time manufacturing it was the only way to go. And I'll give you an example of what one of the problems was. I remember I was about to leave the office. I was working at the president's office in Mitsubishi, and it was I think around 2000. And I heard it was 5 or 6 at night, and I heard about a fire in Japan, in the mountains of Japan. Tiny little factory, burned to the ground. Nobody was hurt, but it was unfortunate because they made a particular kind of resin. And I didn't think much about it. And the next morning, I come in, and one of the groups I worked with was this semiconductor group. And at 8:30 the next morning, the price of flash RAM around the world had gone up 300%. Because as it turns out, that factory made 40% of the resin necessary for flash RAM. And it didn't stabilize for 3 months, 4 months. And that's just one component. And that shows, I think it clearly illustrates how fragile and frail the system is when you talk about there's certain things that are quite relevant for globalization, but we're paying the price for it now with the train wreck that is supply chain. And I shipped my things from Silicon Valley to Australia, and it took, for half a container, it took 15 months.
Sheesh.
And I knew what I was doing. And imagine people who don't. It blows the mind. So when you talk about cultural and localization, it's something that I think is incredibly important. It's, Olumide, if you showed up in Japan and you use the word I, you're done, right? If you don't understand that it's a we culture, you have to understand the cultural nuances that make each culture unique. And if you don't understand it, that's okay. You need to recognize that there's a difference. An example would be, I taught a class for 3 years in Holland for international business and law. It's a grad level course for very young lawyers, and 20% reduction the rest of the world. And I kept saying to myself, first year was 35 students, then 138 students, and I thought that was too much, and then down to 80 students. But they wouldn't engage till Thursday or Friday of my fall week, when I come in for a week in the fall and then again in the spring. And what could I do as an educator to help them realize it's a safe environment to step out of their comfort zone, and they're from every culture represented. Yeah. And so I said, I'm going to do an experiment with you. In the last year I was teaching with 80 students. And I said, I'm going to blow through 120 slides really fast, and I need your help. Okay. It's about how to do business internationally, how to communicate internationally, how to manage people. And I want to illustrate how they're all different. And when you see your slide of all your different culture, I want you to jump out of your chair and yell, stop. And I want you to tell me if the slide is right or not. Now, I knew the slide was very well researched, but I wanted to create a safe environment for them to step out of their comfort zone. And it was shocking to me how that it opened up the floodgates for the next week. I had one young man who was there from Kazakhstan, and he wouldn't shut up. It was awesome, and at the end, the objective wasn't for each of these students to learn about how do you do business between Finland and in Italy, but to understand that the person to the left of you and the person to the right of you, they're wired differently, and you need to recognize that. And so when you talk about relevance of culture and localization, if you want to do business across cultural boundaries, right? Or if you want to raise money, or if you want to re-articulate. I remember there was a story of a car that Ford had launched, and in Spanish, the same word for the title of the car was no go. It just, they didn't think about it,
Yeah.
right? And so how you need to look beyond those boundaries. Another example would be, so I worked with the innovation community in Holland for 3 years, and it was awesome. And I can't tell you how many times I would see a young startup that had very compelling relevance. They had de-risked it, they had productized, they had done well in the Dutch market, and they wanted to move out into the next market. And so, of course, they would want to come to the American market. And each one of them seemed to not would be as yet be successful. I won't say they failed, but instead of being, they did a video and with one company that summed it up perfectly. Instead of being a video in English for the American market, it was a video in English for Dutchmen. It didn't reflect the values of the American audience.
Yeah.
It was lost in translation. So when you talk about culture and when you talk about localization and relevance, you could be 4 degrees off target, 1,000 feet back, and you won't even hit the target. You won't know why.
But how do you know why? So how does let's say a startup or somebody who runs a company in let's say Brazil, and they're trying to communicate to an American market, do they need to hire an American? Do they need to find somebody who watches a bunch of, how do you actually solve that problem? Is there a methodology that you recommend, or is there a way?
The first step is humility, right? To recognize that, the first step in solving a problem is recognizing you have a problem, right? Yeah. Or a challenge in this case, right? And, one of the things that I had the honor and pleasure of meeting the Prince of Holland. Okay, Prince Constantine. And he heard I was coming back. He wanted to meet with us. And a wonderful and dignified man, tremendous. And, we were sitting down together, and he now, to be clear, here's a man who comes from a very, very wealthy family, but he's so committed to trying to help his people that he's helping the startup. He's working with boots on the ground and hands in the dirt, working with the startup community to try to help increase their relevance. And he would say, in his mind, he's got an MBA. He's a lawyer. I mean, he's a smart guy, right? Yeah. And he said, if you bring the VCs, the opportunity will come. And I respectfully said, let me play that scenario out. I could reach out. I could call my friends at, Tim Draper, and I say, Tim, I've got these incredible 6 companies that are remarkable. You really need to check it out. And what would he do? He would send one of his minions to come, and he's going to look at 6 companies. He's going to say, yeah, well, okay. So what are the tax issues? What are the ramifications? Do you have a syndicate that represents? I don't have representation here in Holland. So I need to have, a fellow investor or somebody who reflects my interests in an investment syndicate. Have you thought about any of that? And none of that. I'm not saying that there isn't value here, but I said, I went out and did my research, and I talked to a number of different entrepreneurs, and I asked each one of them, what would it take to hire you? Right. And each one of them said, what's my pension? Okay. So that's a systemic flaw. That's not just throw VCs at it. If you build it, they will come. You have to understand the real value. And that's a Dutch DNA issue that they need to look at. That being said, when I set up the funds, I helped set up funds to bring relevant technology and innovation to China and protect it and invest it by
Mm.
protecting. And we vetted 1,200 companies in a year and shortlisted 100. And lo and behold, a third of those companies came from one incubator in Holland.
Wow.
I mean, they were that relevant. So it's
Mm.
not that there isn't value there, but understanding how that value relates to customers, to strategic partners, to capital markets. You need to step beyond your uh, your cone of comfort and
Yeah.
look beyond. That's where the culture and the localization is incredibly relevant.
Yeah. Yeah. And bringing that back to Bali, how do we, I always advocate for Bali's ecosystem in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of bringing capital into a place like Bali where there's so much talent. We have people in the Web3 world, programmers, developers, a lot of great startup minds, even like yourself, that have come from all over the world. Now, I want to focus that response you just made on Bali and Indonesia as a whole. How do we translate and have let's just say a local place where a VC has a foot on the ground? I mean, it could be you, right? But what would that look like for a place like Bali?
Let, let's take a different run at that question, okay? Rather than, and I understand why you're asking,
Of
and
course, selfish
many
reasons,
people
but
historically have a sparkle in their eye when it comes to Silicon Valley, and they have a sparkle in their eye when it comes to traditional venture and capital. But I would respectfully suggest that you zoom out a little bit and look at value versus
mm-hmm.
capital. Capital and cash is just one form of value.
Mm.
Market validation and market adoption and de-risking, that's another form of value. If you
Mm.
got $1 million investment from Siemens, that's very different than getting it from, say, a VC, right? Think
Yeah.
about it, right? You get the brand validation, access to tremendous resources,
Mm.
channel, and an ability to de-risk or facilitate market adoption and even accelerate that. A VC is
Mm.
not going to bring that for you,
Yeah.
right? The VC may be agnostic, so there are trade-offs with different flavors
Mm.
of money. Okay, but when you're talking about Bali, I'm still learning this. I'm very new to this. I've been to this is my third time to Bali, and each time it has a remarkable effect on me, and it's like none
Mm.
other. And I love Asia. There are many places I love to travel to, but um, even in my limited experience of traveling through Indonesia, Bali is different,
Mm. How
and it's
so?
almost neutral.
Mm.
For example, last month I went to Lombok, which is the neighboring island, and it's almost on par in terms of size. The population is dramatically reduced. There's
Mm.
no traffic, and it's incredibly beautiful.
Yeah.
But it's there's a very different balance there and a very different chemistry in terms of religion and gender, right?
Yeah.
And in terms of I think values in
Yeah.
essence. And one of the things that it's not just about what's actually here with boots on the ground in Bali, but the global perception of what is Bali. It is very much like a Switzerland. And it doesn't matter what color you are, what flavor you are, where you come from. It matters what you got.
Right.
Okay. And in that
Value.
mind, Switzerland, it's not just a tangible, but an intangible value point. So let's say, for example, if I wanted to create and fund a business to make bamboo material for clothing,
Mm.
okay, which is incredibly sustainable. And if you look at the amount of water that's necessary to grow cotton and then take cotton and produce it into a material, it not only it requires tremendous amounts of water, but it toxifies the water when you make the
Yeah.
material. Terrible. Bamboo, it's literally a weed. And it would be awesome. And I'm a 2.5 hour flight from Singapore. And Singapore has no problem doing business with Bali, nor does Australia, nor does Thailand.
Mm.
Right. So I'm thinking in terms of the different accessibilities and the tangibles and the resources that are here, right? As well as the potential markets and access to them.
Mm.
And the impediments that are involved. And you got to be thinking about all these things. There's the old joke, how many Harvard Medical School students does it take to change a light bulb? 10, one to climb the ladder, the other 9 to kick it out from under them. Yeah, it only takes one thing to screw up an initiative.
Yeah.
how do you identify them and navigate the waters accordingly? And in my mind, I've done some traveling in Asia, and this is presents tremendous not just value but unique value.
Hmm.
Let me give you an example. If I wanted, I love the Philippines, for example, right? I've been to the Philippines 19 times. I have two godsons that are half Filipino and half Australian, and they're tremendous, right? One of the reasons why Singapore has banned food from the Philippines is because the regulation pertaining to hormones in chickens, there is none. So they say fast grow chickens, and it's affected the Philippine population now.
Wow.
Because of unregulated, and so that's an impediment, right? You got to look at what's neutral, what's agnostic, and then what do you think is going to happen in 5 years and 10 years, right? I look at, let's say, Indonesia, for example. They're moving their capital, okay? And why are they moving the capital? Why is Jakarta sinking? And it's incredibly polluted. It's incredibly congested. It has tremendous value, but it was actually because when the Dutch colonized, they basically brought the Dutch methodology here, and they made the canals. And then when they paved over everything, there's no way for the rainwater to replenish the water table. So that literally, in addition to global sea level rising, it's literally sinking water and compressing.
Wow.
Okay. So, and it's a historical thing. It is what it is. Okay. So, I look at the future as well. So now, what has Indonesia done? The president has together with the, you couldn't accomplish this without it, but they've decided to moving the capital, and it projected to come online in 2024. That's just the come online part. I mean, and the amount of development that's required to be able to accomplish that, it boggles the mind. But it's a commitment to the future. Okay, and you don't just make a decision like that. That requires the support of the government. It requires the sort of enterprise and corporate. It requires the people, right? And that's a commitment to the future. And unfortunately, many governments, including America and others, it's a fire drill right now. They're not thinking about the future. They're thinking about how do they keep their job, or how do they, it's very short term. And I admire Indonesia for their long-range planning and thinking about some of these issues. You look at the battery, the weaning off of coal, the moving of the capital, the way they're positioning themselves geopolitically. No more coal to China, and no more nickel, because we want to make batteries ourselves. And everybody's made some mistakes in the past, but this is a look to the future of how can we do better. And that's something I both admire and applaud, right?
Yeah.
And so Bali is a hub of many of these things. I mean, I'm going to, am I pronouncing Bandung?
Bandung. Yeah.
Thank you. See, I'm learning. Yeah. Humility is a beautiful thing.
There you go.
To go work with some of the universities in a couple of weeks, and you need the talent in order to create the systemic intrinsic value. How do you do that, right? How do you build those bridges? How do you accrue that relationship equity? Because it's not just about rest of world. It's about how do you build the value around that. So one of the other things you said, why Bali, and I think it's important to distinguish that my own perspective, at least, is that it's not about where something's birthed, but where it takes hold. And I see Bali as a fertile garden. Because I'll tell you one thing from personal experience, I could reach out to anybody in my network and say, hey, I need your domain knowledge for this semiconductors or hardware or software or blockchain. I need your help. Come hang out at a bunkhouse. We need to build this product. And they done.
Yeah.
Because of the perception of specter of value. It is beautiful here. But people also, there's a reality factor that's palpable.
Yeah, it sounds like there's room for a lot of innovation here. I think, obviously, as you mentioned earlier, there's a perception of both paradise, hanging out on the beach. But what you're telling us right now is that there is a massive potential for innovation and to create value in the system, in the ecosystem.
Part of it has to do with the foundation that's been built. We stand on the shoulders of giants, right? And in order to get to what I see today, what just happened with G20, a lot of people put in a lot of hard work and it's not just the legacy culture, but the efforts of many to be able to
Mm.
get to where we are. And I see that as fundamentally a foundation to build on.
Yeah.
There's tremendous potential for that. I'm a 6-hour flight from Sydney, for God's sake, or 3.5 to Perth. I'm close to everything.
Yeah.
So I get the best of all worlds, and I'm agnostic.
Hmm.
I mean, if you look geopolitically, there's a chip war going on right now, and a lot of friction points between, a lot of the China and the U.S. and it's very brittle. I look at many different cultures. Singapore is very compelling too, but it's also the most expensive city state. It's a city state, the most expensive real estate on the planet, right? You can't do things there. Right? They got the rule of law protecting them, which is very compelling, but it's also incredibly expensive, which makes it cost prohibitive. It's also not nearly as organic as it is here. I love Singapore, but in order to do a proper startup, you have to be able to embrace not only success, but failure.
Yeah.
And culturally, that's a really big problem. That's something that they have to work on. They've come so far. Yeah. It's fantastic. But if you fumble, and we do fumble, we all, it's a human condition to make some mistakes. It's part of what, in order to succeed, it's what you learn from those mistakes in order to succeed. So it's a double-edged sword. You have to embrace that. I see that here.
Yeah.
And it's partly because so many different cultures coalesce here, right?
Yeah.
And, are you familiar with Harvard Square?
No, I'm not.
Okay. So where I grew up in Cambridge in Boston, literally just adjacent to Harvard campus is what's called Harvard Square. And right down the street from MIT, but Harvard Square was a really interesting, it had the perception of the hip place. And the reality is it was sort of like Silicon Valley in one respect. After a point, it was all the suburban kids coming in to see what was going on. And that was the action, is all the suburban kids coming. So it was self-perpetuating, right? Yeah. And that's to some degree some of the inertia that I see what's happening here. You get people coming in from every different culture in every different corner of the planet. You don't know, it could be from anywhere.
Yeah.
From Scandinavia, from Morocco. It's amazing the diversity that you see here.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that helps you or not, but again, I guess my point is it's not about the light bulb moment, but about where it can take hold, where it can grow. Yeah. And that's what they're, if you look at the ingredients of value, channels, access to customers, agnostic, as little bias as possible, they've got it all. It checks every box.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant. I'm glad you put it in that way, because it's something that you wouldn't necessarily think about until you dig deeper. And I think that's a leeway to critical thinking. A lot of the things I've been learning, even from just being with you, spending time with you, is how to take, like you said, one technology or one idea and innovate and create something even better. So, I mean, on these podcasts, I want to basically allow people to practically learn. So is there an exercise you can take us through in terms of critical thinking, or an example on how you can apply one, niche industry to another and solve a big problem?
Well, I want to talk about you for a moment. So let me see if I pronounce it. Olumide, right?
Olumide.
See, I'm learning to pronounce it right.
Yeah, you're doing it.
Humility is a beautiful thing, right? Practice the way we preach. I don't want to be a hypocrite, right?
Sure.
But you have your particular background, and what you brought to this party is very interesting, and why I reached out to you in the first place, right? I read a CNBC article about you, and it's about taking everything you've got, and it's not a why, but a why not, right? Here's someone who was born in Nigeria, went to London, went to the U.S. and South America, and then and was on your way to becoming a professor, and then like, excuse me, what am I doing, right? This isn't what I want. This is making me happy. And you're an early adopter. As my parents used to say, we vote with our feet. We're defined by our actions. You came here, you figured out where the bodies are buried, where the diamonds are buried, how to navigate, how to build a life for yourself, and how to find better balance. And good on you for that, right?
Yeah.
Well, you're Australian, right?
Good on you, mate.
Yeah, right. But so you represent an example, but I want to come back to your question. When you say critical thinking, see, you're a very pragmatic individual, right? And you have a very cohesive and compelling sense of methodology that I really admire. I would respectfully clarify, there's a difference between when you say critical thinking, most people associate it with, the clinical,
Yeah.
the academic side,
Yeah.
in a very lofty perspective. I look at it. I have my own version of that, which I used to teach in the MBA program. Applied critical thinking. It's like real world blood and guts down in the trenches. What does that really mean, right? And I used to try to, and teaching that is incredibly hard,
Yeah.
right? First, you have to explain what is it, right? In terms of questioning the world around you, making up your own mind, not garnering, constantly doing research and assimilating what's going on, what you've learned from that, trying to release as much bias as possible, and then trying to help impart that to. You can't do it for somebody has to start to think about it. And one of the most satisfying moments for me as an adjunct professor was 4 years after the first time I taught, one of my original students ran into me on Market Street in San Francisco, and they remembered almost all the examples I had presented. I was shocked. And he said, once you turn on that light, you can't turn it off. I'm thinking about it constantly. Right.
Yeah.
And an example would be, I have a very dear friend named KG, and he's a remarkable man. He was born in Sweden, but his mother was from Jamaica, father from Trinidad. And one of the most dignified men I've ever met. And he had set up a $500 million fund for the second largest shipping family in Norway. And then he he did 2 startups and exited, and has tremendous respect for me. And I asked him to be my first guest speaker it was a residency program. So 8 hours, you talk about staring at the precipice, Indiana Jones moment. So I broke up my day and I said, I want you to be a guest speaker. And he was, I don't know what to say. Tell them your experience, tell them your journey. And he chose to talk about a particular experience. He was walking along the Mississippi, and he had set up a $500 million fund, and he was paying attention, looking and reading the waves on the water and the clues. And I didn't realize this, but he was bringing tankers over from Saudi Arabia and emptying the oil here and sending them back empty. But it turns out you can't send a tanker back empty because it needs ballast. So in their infinite wisdom, it's standard practice to fill it with seawater. Holy and so on the Deadhead Run, it's a cost center. Okay. And so he's thinking to himself, what could I do to be more relevant, to take advantage? I've got this big ship moving back across the planet. Yeah. And so he's reading the paper, these things called newspapers back. And he discovers that the Mississippi had an immediate problem with the emerging toxic algae blooms. Do you know what that is?
No.
So when the pH is wrong, it becomes very acidic. I think it's very healthy for an algae that literally can kill you. And once it starts, it absorbs all the oxygen in the water and it blooms. It's catastrophic. And you have to absolutely nip that in the bud. And so in order to do that, you have to figure out causation. Why is this happening? And so the government immediately figured out the reason was because upstream of the industrial pig farms. And in America, it's very common practice to feed the pigs too much nitrogen to try to keep them healthy. And then they have these lakes of pig shit, and the runoff would run out into the Mississippi. And so the states immediately said, you've got to immediately eliminate these lakes of pig shit and mitigate this right away. Yeah. And they're, these pig farmers are, the industrial pig farmers are and KG rolls up, pay me money, I take your pig. And they pay him money, and he sends his tanker truck up to suck out the pig shit. 1, 2, 3, 4, and he puts it on his tanker. Now he's already turned it from a cost center into a profit center, right? And now he brings it back to Saudi Arabia, and he sells it as fertilizer for non-halal, right? Holy. And of course, I'm thinking, I always think very, very much, supply chain and causation and so on. I said, KD, doesn't that up your tanks? He goes, no, Michael, actually, normally when you put the seawater, it's very caustic, very corrosive. I have to pay a shitload of money for this toxic cleaner in Saudi, but the pig shit is an active cleaner. I don't have to pay any money. I've saved 3 times money on pig shit.
Wow.
And oh, by the way, the pig shit's active. I can pick up all the methane and use it to power all my secondary systems and air conditioning. So I make money 4 times on pig shit.
That's amazing.
That's nonlinear applied critical thinking at its best. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
When I heard that story, I was like, what? you know?
That's just an example, but the question then becomes, how do you teach that to somebody?
Yeah,
Right. And
exactly.
that's a tough hill to climb. And so I tried, I'm kind of like a velociraptor. I'm always testing the fence, trying to see what works, what doesn't. And,
Yeah.
different, I try to experiment and to see what, and now granted, the demographic of my, always know your audience is one of the key issues. And whether you're doing a capital raise or whether you're looking at a given market, you're building relationship equity, understanding who the players are and what's important to them is incredibly important. And even if you're not successful, at least try.
Yeah.
It's not about you, it's about them.
Yeah.
Right? And so in my case, I had 30, 35 students from around the world, design thinkers looking at impact. How can I engage with them from all across many different cultures? And so I said, all right, I used little sound bites or video bites, I guess, to help for them to remember. And I first showed them, I explained what is it, and then I pulled up a video. If you look up Men in Black Critical Thinking,
Yep, I
you
remember
see
this video.
Will Smith being interviewed, and he starts laughing because he says, "Why am I here?"
Yeah.
Right, and he's questioning the world around, and he looks. And I encourage you, look it up on YouTube, MIB Critical Thinking, and they're all laughing, but they're thinking about it. And I said, okay, so I'm going to do two examples. I'll do the first one, and then I want you to do the second one. I'll show you how it's done, and then you do it. And they're all on board with it. And so I gave two different examples, and if you like, I can go through them. But
please do.
Well, the first one I looked at was I showed them a video of Big Belly. Now, Big Belly is a solar trash compactor that goes into common parks and things and common areas for cities and campuses and so on. And it was one of the worst video marketing pieces I've ever seen, but there was only one detail in it. And I said, what did you garner from that? And they're sort of scratching their head. I said, and finally one student said, well, you save 4 out of 5 trips, emptying that trash can. Okay, so that's the only detail they gave. And I said, I asked the class, how much do you think that each trip whenever I roll a truck, how much does it cost to go empty that? And somebody says $50, and I says $100, more, 150, 200. I said $300 to $500, and they didn't understand. How can that be?
Yeah.
The guy probably makes $35. It doesn't matter how much the guy makes, but he's probably not alone. There's probably a second guy. They've got service on the vehicle. They got to pay, depreciation on the vehicle itself. They got to pay fuel. They got to pay maintenance. They got back end. They've got, the CFO, whoever it is. There's a lot of hidden costs involved. Okay. So if I already know that each time I save, $300 to $500 each time, how much money does it take? How much do you think the unit costs? And they said, oh, it's, $750. I said more. So let's take a guess. Just use our logic brain, not lizard brain. Yeah. And say, let's assume it's $2,000. When do you think they're going to reach cash flow break even on this investment? And that exercise allowed them to realize it wasn't the president of Harvard that puts these onto campus. It was the controller, the CFO, who said, oh, this is cost recovery. I can find lost money. And that's a powerful motivator for your customer. And the class gets all excited. Okay, so we want to do one. So I showed another video. And this is a very elegant video a number of years ago of 2 young men who had created a gutless laptop. Okay, so it has a keyboard, it's got a smart pad, and it's got a screen, but no guts. And you plug it into your Android phone, boom, you got a computer. And the video showed, we get on the train in Sunnyvale, and we take Caltrain up to the city in San Francisco, and we don't have to schlep a bag, and I can just bring my phone and plug it in at home and plug it in the office. Isn't that awesome? Yeah. Okay. And I asked the class what their thoughts were on the video and what they garnered. And one last detail, they had raised $3 million in Kickstarter and $2 million in venture. So there's validation. And they gave their feedback, and they said, well, what did you think from it? I said, well, I think it's probably one of the worst product market fits I've ever seen. It's all about want, not need.
Yeah.
And I think that it's great what they've done, but it's not to the right audience. Yeah. And they said, well, what do you mean? I said, okay, let me ask you guys a question. And I said, how much of the world do you think doesn't have a computer? And they said 20%, 30%. It's actually, at the time, it was 70%. Okay. How much of the world, of that 70%, how much do you think has a smartphone? And then 10, 20, it's actually 40%. has a smartphone. There's a lot of the world, and it's changing now.
Yeah.
But at the time, I said, how much of Asia do you think is Android versus Apple? And most people will say anywhere from 20 to 50%. It's actually 90%.
Yep.
Right.
Everyone I know has Android. All my
Right. And
Indonesian
see, this
friends.
is where a little bit of market knowledge
Yeah.
goes an incredibly long way. So based on those numbers, I would get on, if it were me, I'd get on a plane.
Yep.
I'd go to Laos or Cambodia, and I go to the head of the National Development Bank, which is their job to help their people. And I'd say, look, they're selling this unit. We're selling this unit for $120 in the US. If you commit to buying 20,000 units, I'll give it to you for $80 a unit. Right? So you get economies of scale. And then you subsidize. You can't give it away for free because people won't value it. But if you subsidize it $25, what parent wouldn't want for $55, wouldn't find the money to give their child a computer?
Yeah.
And that's a need, not want. I mean, they found the money for a smartphone. So it's about values, right? And so that's in a nutshell, it's about trying to take what you see and judging it against objective metrics, right?
Wow.
And look at relevance and problem solving and sort of nonlinear thinking, right? Does that make any sense?
That helps a lot. I feel like this is a masterclass, and these examples you're giving are super helpful. They're practical, yet they show people how you can actually apply it. I want to talk about the flavors of money. It's something we talk about a lot, right? When I asked you, I want to raise a bunch of money, you said, wait, from who? Are you a startup founder? Are you a institution? And so I would love for you to take us through these different categories and tell us about how to raise money, because that's what people want to know, right? Because I always ask that question.
There are two different questions there that you just got. What are the flavors of money, and how do you raise money? Okay,
correct.
So let's parse them for the moment. Let's talk about the flavors of money. And there, you have to think about the audience. It's about you, not me. Same exercise. So you have everything from friends and family, right? You got high net worth. You've got incubators and accelerators, right? You got vertical incubator and accelerators. They're very specialized, not generalized. Then you've got, I think I covered high net worth. You've got
institutional.
You got VCs or early VCs, and then you've got bankers and so on. There are many flavors, and each one has trade-offs. So if I go to you as a high net worth individual, okay, and I'm looking for 50,000 from you to help start whatever it is that I'm doing, that decision I can pretty much say is going to be an emotional one. They're going to size you up. They're going to size up the opportunity. Do I think this is worthwhile? And you got to think about that. If you want to raise money from an institutional, like a VC or some kind of fund, part of their job is going to be to do due diligence on you. So that you can add 3 months right there, right? That's a much longer process, right? And then, the old adage, you work as hard to raise for $1 million as you do to raise 20 million becomes very relevant here. It's the same. So that there's a whole process there. And then the question is it something that they care about? Okay. So whether it's high net worth or friends and family, I mean, friends and family, people are going to invest not because they see the product, but because they believe in you.
Yeah.
Right. And then you're leveraging relationship equity, and you really don't want to screw up when that happens.
That's the one you only get one chance. All right.
You make best efforts, but so it's important that the flavors of money, right? And then how do you raise money is a very different exercise. How do you engage with them? Yeah. So you engage with a high net worth individual, right, in a very different way than you would a traditional VC. In Silicon Valley, it's pretty common to, they'll tell you I've got 45 minutes, but on their books internally, they have an hour and a half just so they have a quick exit plan in case they're not enthusiastic about it. Right. Yeah. And the question, you find so many entrepreneurs because they think, oh, this is my child. I have to put everything into the presentation. Well, but what's the objective of the presentation? The presentation is really, it's a methodology to help build a relationship. So you don't want to put everything into it. You want to put enough to you're playing poker. You want to put enough to start and validate a conversation. And most entrepreneurs I've discovered, they don't realize that just because if I present value to you, right, you're not the one that's going to make the decision. You're going to go and think about it. You're going to talk to people in your organization. You're going to talk to people, domain people that you might know, that you might respect. And I won't be there to help explain it. And my own metric, if I can't convey 80% of the value, at least 80% that you can then convey to others, I've failed. Right? And you can test yourself. Have you ever heard of the mom factor before?
The what factor?
The mom factor.
No, not.
Everybody thinks their baby's beautiful and their baby's ugly. I mean, there's something wrong with it. Nobody's perfect. No initiative is perfect. And so you have to be able to step beyond that, right? In terms of how you articulate value to people, right? So that they here's an example. When I was at Sony and we were on the VAIO launch team, and the president of Sony took a shine to me, and he says, Michael, you do awesome work, and he really and he wanted to help me. We both left Sony for the same reasons, but at very different levels, and that was fine. And I realized, I thought to myself, I said, look, I'm not a Harvard Business School kind of guy. I'm an MIT guy, but the question is, my value is I can do magic, but it doesn't show up on paper the same way. So how can I think about, this is 2002, how can I convey to somebody I've never met, how can I empower a guy like Carl if he wants to recommend me to a third person that I've never met, that have no idea, how can I give him the right tools, right? And I started thinking about third-party evangelism. I said, if a guy like Carl can speak to my value, and a guy like Steve, and a number of people who I've done magic for, let them speak for me. So it doesn't seem self-serving, and it's valid, and it's quite real. So I reached out to some of the people I had done magic for, the TI Corporate War Chest, venture fund. I'd done, people I had done and delivered value for, and unlocked, unseen value for. And they each wrote something quite compelling. And I put it together in one sheet. I said, okay. And I gave it to Carl. I couldn't believe how powerful it was. People I had never met, who didn't even have to know all the people on the sheet, were picking up a phone calling me. Right, saying, wow. I want to sit down with this young man who troublemaker. We like this. We think he can do magic for us. Right. Yeah. And this is 2 years before LinkedIn happened. And so I encourage people, whoever the audience, have you developed third dimensional value on your LinkedIn profile, so somebody can look at not only what you say about yourself, what do other people say about it? That's what I want to know. What do your customers say? What do your clients? What are your investors? What are your, people you've worked with? Does this person represent integrity? Do they meet or exceed expectation? Do they understand deliverables? Are they easy to work with? Are they flexible? Are they true to the value versus the idea? Right? Yeah. These are the things I want to know about. Yeah. Because when you climb into bed with somebody, even whether you invest with them or whether you collaborate with them, you're inheriting all their legacy too. Does it represent integrity and professionalism and innovation, or does it represent navigating in a toxic way? Yeah. Wow. That's powerful. Yes. It's what you said is not just get a reference, get somebody to write you a reference. No, this is Frank Lloyd Wright always used to say 3 or 5, never 2 and 4. Right. And so, I mean, I try to practice what I preach. I think I've got 40, 45, 50. I don't remember anymore how many recommendations from luminaries in the industry. Yeah. So the question is, and when cross boundaries, that's what I'd like to know about. If I'm going to go and start to work with somebody, I want to learn what have they done? And I'm not going to be judgmental. I don't judge that way, but I do want to understand that for example, it's part of the human condition. Money changes people. Absolutely. And when you invest money, or when you raise money, or when you build, how do they behave before and after? Yeah. Right. Because I want to know that's that sense of professionalism or that the driven nature is it doesn't deviate, right? Yeah. And that's not a given. People are different, but that's where you choose to work with certain people over others. Right. And to me, when you talked about investing, there are 3 basic elements, and I've added a 4th. So there's TIM, right, for team, idea, market. Okay. And I put in parentheses an E at the end for emotion. Because if you build an emotional bridge to your lizard brain, that explains the why. I mean, that's the reason that differentiates, something like Apple, which is a lifestyle company, versus say HP, which is a computer company. Yep. And so I've already made a decision. If I need a computer, I'm just going to go and buy a Mac. The question not whether I buy a Mac, but which Mac do I need? There we go. And so that's an emotional decision, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And that trumps team idea.
Yeah.
Marketing.
The fact that it's a computer and it does this function.
Right.
Yeah.
Many people come to me asking me for stuff and they say, "Oh, Michael, can you help me get a job or can you help me raise money?" And more often than not, I'll task them with something, partly because I want to see it, but partly because I want to see what they do. Many of my students, "Can you help me find jobs?" Okay, can you craft a bio for me? I want to see a 3/4 page bio and I want to see it say this. 3/4 of them will disappear.
They don't show up the next day.
I want to, you have to overcome the climate of entitlement too.
Now, with those students, I mean, you have experience with so many individuals, people all the way high up, corporate and then startup students. Just one question I have for you is, what is the factor? Is there one or two factors that you've seen in success rate for these students or somebody at a high level in terms of, whether it's soft skills? Yeah, let me rephrase it. When you see success on the venture level, whether it's a conglomerate, massive company, or it's a startup who's just raising their first seed capital, are there themes or elements that make one company more successful than another, just on a practical level?
The word agility comes to mind, especially profoundly different now and more relevant in a post-COVID world. If I run into a corporate that says, "But that's the way we've always done it. They're a dinosaur, they're extinct, they're the Walking Dead, and they don't know it." That's not a reason to make decision making, right? But those, and not just true of startups, but true of corporates that can, the difference between part of the reason why Siemens is so successful and yet Kodak who, or Blockbuster who, because they're not paying attention. Right. And I remember the story when Kodak, there was a board of directors meeting and somebody brought out a Sony Mavica and slammed it on the table and said, "This is the death of our business. It's not if, but when. If it's 7 years, we're done. We're a $10 billion chemical company. But if it's 14 years, we have an opportunity to navigate." And they didn't pay attention to what he said. Right. Yeah. It's that kind of, and if agility wasn't relevant before, it's absolutely a categorical imperative now.
Yeah.
In terms of ability to navigate, right? And so those characteristics are part of not only the individual, but the DNA of a company. Right?
So if the DNA and the founders and the values they have is wrong from the beginning, do you think they're or you think it's something that can be adjusted?
It's problematic. Now, there's different elements of DNA. So let's take corporate venture, for example, right? So venture capital is a very different exercise than corporate venture, okay? So venture, I'm looking at basically it's high-risk banking. I'm looking to make money on money. Yeah. And I'm not going to invest in you unless I have a confidence factor that I think that, for example, you're going to do a 10x multiple in a 3 to 5 year window, okay? That's a sort of a given. And if I make 10 investments, I'm hoping one will succeed. And if I get 2, then I've doubled my return and my IRR, my investor rate of return, I'm going to be successful as an investor. Okay. So just money on money.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a question of being able to validate and vet and qualify and then execute and manage. Okay. But corporate venture is a very different exercise. And this again comes back to knowing your audience. So corporate doesn't invest because they think that they're going to make money at this. That's almost tertiary in some respects. They do it for strategic value. And this comes to knowing your audience. So, for example, let's say, Olumide, you've invented a new light bulb, right? And you come to me as a VC and say, "Oh my God, Michael, this light bulb's awesome. I've productized. I've got these key customers. I've got a defensible position. It's awesome, right? And I'm going to make $50 million next year." As a VC, I'm like, "Wow, that's pretty cool. You got my interest. You're looking for small investment. Fantastic." Yeah. Right? Money on money. You take that message over to Siemens or to Philips or GE, and I'm going to say, "Great, I'm really happy for you. Why the hell should I care?" Yeah. But if you change the message, same content, and you say, "Okay, guess what? I've got this great light bulb. I've productized. I've got a defensible position. Here's how it's going to impact this business unit at 1.6 billion and this business unit at 3.4 billion. And here's how it's going to maintain defensibility, a product differentiation." Ooh, that's a buzzword, right? For the next years going forward because of this, and this. I'm your new best friend.
Now, is that a thing of capital? Is it that Siemens or these companies are just so much larger, so they're looking for strategy for scale,
No, they're looking for
or is
strategic value, right? And
okay?
it's a very different agenda. So, corporate venture started, I guess, in the '90s. I want to say it's followed as the tail that wags the dog. Ventures, we know it started in the '60s, and
Mhm.
then corporate ventures in the '90s, and it started as, oh, this is a sexy new product. Ooh, cool, new division, right? And so I'll acquire the company.
Mm.
And corporates, they have a lot of smart people involved, and they started realizing, I think we need to get a little bit earlier in the food chain and become almost co-architects a little bit. And to give you an idea, from the years 2013 to 2016, over a 3-year period, the amount of money that went into the C round doubled, literally doubled, and
Wow.
the B round even earlier 60% on a 3-year window.
Wow.
Holy
What happened?
they're starting to it means that the corporate is moving earlier and
Mm.
earlier. They're realizing we
Yeah.
need to get earlier on the as they iterate. We can't wait
Mhm.
for it to be
Yeah.
a box with a pretty red bow on it.
Before we get in, yeah,
And then
makes sense.
they're different. There's different corporate DNA. Now, there's no judgment here, but I've discovered that there's a whole spectrum. You've got very, very tactical corporate funds like 7-Eleven Ventures, for example, or I think Harley Davidson has a fund, and they're I remember them being very tactical. And then
Mm.
you have very funds that think very long range, like Siemens or JetBlue Ventures, or JetBlue Ventures even has part of their fund they allocate to, they call it blue sky. They have tactical, which is 0 to 18 months in terms of, is
Mm.
it going to be impactful, 2 to 5 years, and then a blue sky. They literally do a carve out for things we think is
Mm.
going to be really interesting, but we don't really know how it's going to manifest yet.
Mm.
And they ended up investing in Joby, right?
What's
The
Joby?
autonomous planes, right?
Ah, okay.
So
Mm.
my point is that you have to understand your audience.
Yeah.
If you want to be successful, whether it's a venture fund, who has a particular presence or commitment or investment into a particular domain, which is really
Hmm.
cool. You need to know about that. How will it
Yeah.
be a complement? Not just will we help make money on money? Fantastic,
Yeah.
but we can also help these other. It's like a Venn diagram, right?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
investor breathing wouldn't want a complement to their existing portfolio investment for risk mitigation?
Yeah.
But if it's corporate, it's a very different exercise. How's that
Mm.
going to differentiate? How do you engage with a Korean VC versus a Japanese fund, right? Versus a German fund, for example. They're
Yeah.
very different. It's a very different metric.
Yeah. Which brings me to the question of unbiased, and then it's something we talk about a lot. What role does that play? When you're talking to a specific type of a VC or a fund, um, you know, putting it on the table. I know Silicon Valley is a certain type of way, right? They like certain companies, and one thing I was watching a podcast, and somebody said uh, Silicon Valley and people who invest in people they like, right, or people that are similar to them and remind them of themselves or that they can relate to.
Well, there's a lot of nepotism, and it's very incestuous in Silicon Valley in many respects. And so that's I think it's a poor example, unfortunately,
Mm.
because there's a lot of uh, there are a number of efforts that invest or put money in because of the specter of value, or the specter of, it's a FOMO exercise. I mean, look at how the whole crypto market has bottomed out. That was all because of the old boy network.
Yeah.
Uh, so I think that's not a great example.
Mm.
But if you look at some of the very objective investors and what they're doing and what they've done, and it's not just it's true of high net worth, it's true of corporates, it's true of institutionals. They tend to put that aside. It's not just because I like you or because of what you've done. What do I think you can do? Do I have a confidence factor,
Mm.
right? And anybody who recognizes we all have biases, right?
Of
It's
course.
part of the human condition, but many people don't recognize what they're bringing to the equation, right? And how do you? And once you recognize, you can try to address and overcome them, and look objectively.
Well, I've had a lot of great learnings today. I saw this as a master class for me. I'm somebody who's always looking to learn about finance and wealth and, garner knowledge from people like yourself. What I want to ask you though is something a little bit more loose. I want to hear a story, something from Silicon Valley and something from San Francisco, something, funny or maybe the best or funniest experience that you've had while in, Silicon Valley in that kind of environment. I know it's different than typical talk about, investing and VCs, but I like to have a little fun. So I want to hear, something interesting that's happened to you that you've experienced.
I'm going to take artistic license and I've been thinking about my journey, and there are a couple of pivotal moments where I became not a why person, but a why not person. And I think that, it's something that served me in very good stead in terms of the way I my perspective going forward. When I was in high school, I was bored, and I got certified as a diver at 15. And I was kind of precocious, to say the least. And I said, my attitude, why the hell hasn't the Navy figured out this bends, yet? 50 years. Come on, get with the program.
And bends meaning how to not be sick
when you're diving, and when you come up too fast and the nitrogen comes out of solution. It can be catastrophic physiologically. And so I turned around and I convinced a professor at MIT to take me under his wing and I said, I don't want any money. I just want to work. I want to work in the lab. I want to figure this thing out. And instead of approaching it as to the way the Navy had approached it and everybody else, why does human physiology get the bends? We approached it very differently. Why don't dolphins? Because dolphin physiology and human physiology are virtually the same. Turns out there are 12 anomalies. And on the sixth one, we isolated it, figured it out. And, I even took my own blood sample, sent it down to 100 feet, and did a rapid ascent. I had no nucleation, and I promptly, the Office of Naval Research bought our research and buried it. Right? So I learned at age 15 about NIH from Not Invented Here, right?
Yeah.
And so I did a couple years of research, and then it came time to go to college, and I realized that I was insecure, and I was intimidated by MIT. I said, no, I couldn't go to school there. So I went to another school, and then I realized, that's really what I wanted. So I wanted to go back to MIT, but I only realized this in the middle of August, okay, and after my freshman year. And so I managed to get an appointment with the dean of admissions at MIT. And I had already thought about it. I played this out in my head. It's about him, not me. And this is really important. This is where 90% of the people, or 95% would fail. And I remember it so clearly. His name is Dean Richardson. And I said, Dean, it's a pleasure. Thank you for making the time. And he says, nice to meet you, Michael. What can I do for you? I said, I'm ready for MIT, and MIT's ready for me. And he said, that's great, Michael, but we have this thing called rules. 6 months ago was a deadline for transfer, and a month ago was for special students. I said, wait a second, because I'd done my homework, right? Do your research. I said, special student, that's a partial course load. He goes, yeah, take that off the table. I'm here to get the job done, matriculate, get my degree, and get the out. But I've thought about this, and I have a proposition for you that's a win-win proposition with no exposure. And he goes, really? And he literally does it. Bring it on. I said, let me audit a whole year, right? Full course load. Throw everything you got at a kitchen sink, the whole bit. If I get a B or better average, I roll in, not only those credits become real, but I roll in all my legacy credits. I'm on trajectory. If not, it's a wash, never hits the books. He goes, okay, works for me.
Wow.
Right. I thought about his world, not mine. So what does he think about? The two things he thinks about. He's playing a high risk poker game. He has to balance between students that he thinks are going to be successful and that those students are going to be happy.
Yeah.
Right. And so he has to send out probably, I'm guessing, 400 acceptance for hoping to get, or 1,500 acceptance to get, 800, however the incoming freshman class, how many, and then let's see, balancing act, right? And I've just taken out all the risk for him. I've shown him that you got to motivate a student who can get the job done.
You figured out someone's value. And you just served it on the plate.
Again, it comes back to it's a why not exercise. But I put some thought into what is that conversation going to look like, and what can I do? What drives him? It's not about me.
Yeah,
he's sitting. I'd never met him before. I thought about how is that conversation going to unfold?
Yeah,
and it was about empathy, right? And it wasn't about breaking the system. It was about, and as it turned out, I didn't know this, but that's part of what the MIT DNA is about, is problem solving. There was a study done, in fact, that said that 1 out of every 10 companies in the US of 30 years ago was founded by an MIT alum.
Wow.
Like HP, for example. I mean, holy right? And that's part of the MIT spirit. And turns out I spoke to that, but I was looking at problem solving. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, I get off.
Well, I mean, listen, it's been a great chat with you. I think we'll definitely do this again. Before we go, is there anything we haven't covered, or anything you want to shout to the world and share?
No. I encourage people to come see what I see in Bali. It really is remarkable in terms of the way, and I challenge you to think about that fertile garden. It's not about where it's birthed. You could bring an initiative here, coalesce, validate, vet, access to markets, access to cultures. It's a launch pad, right? And come see for yourself. If you haven't experienced it, you should. There's a reason why this is the home of digital nomads, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be digital. It can be hardware. It could be any number of different initiatives. But this is it's a tremendous place.
Yeah.
Anyway, just my humble perspective. What do I know, right?
Yeah. Well, you know a lot, and I'm thankful you're here to share it with us. But you all have heard it today. Come to Bali. Thank you, Michael.
It's my pleasure, Olumide.
Appreciate it.
Thanks. All right.